The year was 1808. And the heat in Barbados was the kind that pressed down on a person like a hand over the mouth. The auction yard was loud and crowded. The smell of salt, sweat, and something rotten hung in the air. Isadora stood on the wooden platform with her wrists bound and her heart slamming against her ribs. "Don't show them you're afraid," she thought to herself. "Don't you dare, Isadora." She kept her chin up. Her green eyes scanned the crowd below her, merchants, plantation owners, men with cold eyes and even colder wallets. All of them looking at her like she was something to be bought. She was 18 years old. 3 weeks ago, she had been Lady Isadora Fennick, daughter of a Caribbean baron. She had a home, a name, and a future. Then her half-brothers came in the night. They took everything. The documents. The title. And then they took her as well. The auctioneer's voice rang out, interrupting her thoughts. Starting bid, £20. Isadora's stomach dropped, and the crowd stirred. Numbers were thrown like stones. 30, 40, 50. "This isn't real," Isadora muttered under her breath. "It can't be." But the rope around her wrists said otherwise. £60. 70. And then, one voice. Calm. Cutting through the noise like a blade. £100. The yard went quiet almost immediately. Isadora's eyes searched the crowd and found him. He was young. Maybe 20, or 21. Golden brown hair. Steel blue eyes that were looking directly at her, not with hunger, or with ownership. With something she hadn't seen on a single face since she arrived on that dock. Anger. The man was angry. But she could only wonder if he was angry on her behalf, or it was because of something else entirely. Sold. The auctioneer shrieked in delight, and the gavel came down. And just like that, a stranger purchased her freedom. He didn't speak as he cut the rope from her wrists. He pressed a heavy purse of coins into her shaking hands and leaned close enough for only her to hear. "Go," he said. "And don't look back." She wanted to ask his name, but when she turned around, he had already disappeared into the darkness. If you're already hooked, you won't want to miss what happens next. Like this video, subscribe, and share it with someone who loves a good love story. Because trust me, this one is about to get a lot more complicated. 11 years later, Wycliffe Hall stood at the end of a long gravel drive like something carved from a dream. Pale stone columns, ivy thick on the walls, tall windows catching the grey English morning light. Isadora stood at the iron gate. She had just turned 29 a couple of days ago. The girl from that auction platform was gone. In her place stood a woman with a composed face, a borrowed name, and a single leather traveling bag. Miss Clara Whitmore, that was who she was today. She breathed in once. Breathed out slowly. Then she pushed the gate open and walked toward the front door. She had heard the rumors from a former housemaid in London that the late Duke of Wycliffe had kept extensive Caribbean correspondence. Letters. Documents. Records of titles and inheritances that the old Duke had promised to protect. And those documents would be her proof as claim to her dead father's title. They were somewhere in that house. And Isadora intended to find them. She raised her hand and knocked. The door opened to a wall of noise. Something crashed upstairs. A child's voice, high-pitched and completely unbothered, narrated what sounded like the great escape of a small animal. A fern sat overturned near the foot of the staircase, soil scattered across the marble. Tiny muddy boot prints led from the entry hall to somewhere no one had thought to investigate. The butler stood in the middle of it all, wearing the expression of a man counting the days until retirement. "Miss Whitmore?" he asked. "Yes," Isadora said. She looked at the fern. The boot prints. The distant sound of children yelling at the top of their voices. Something moved at the corner of her mouth. Just barely. The beginning of a smile she decided not to finish. "The Duke will see you shortly," the butler said. As she walked off, the butler spoke again. "The last 3 candidates left before noon. Good luck, Miss Whitmore." Isadora gulped at his words and blinked away her now rapidly climbing nerves. She was still looking at the overturned fern. Still composed. Then her green eyes moved once around the chaotic entry hall and settled on the man who had just appeared at the top of the stairs. Her heart stopped. He was taller than she remembered. Broader. The golden brown hair was swept back now, and there were faint lines at the corners of those steel blue eyes that hadn't been there on a dock in Barbados 11 years ago. But it was definitely him. Thomas Blackwell, Duke of Wycliffe, came down the stairs with the particular stillness of a man who had learned to carry a great deal without letting it show. He adjusted his cuff link once and looked at her. It was clear he had no idea who she was. Of course he doesn't, Isadora sighed to herself. I was 18 back then. Half-starved and shaking. But I'm not that girl anymore. She held his gaze. Steady. Professional. Not a single flicker. Miss Whitmore, he said. His voice was even. Your Grace, Isadora said as she curtsied. He looked at her the way people sometimes look at a word they cannot quite place, a flicker of something unresolved behind those eyes, and then it was gone. You're the 4th candidate this month. I'm aware. The other 3 left. I heard. She glanced once at the muddy boot prints on the marble floor. And I'm not going anywhere. Something shifted in his expression. Just barely. He gestured toward the sitting room. This way. The interview lasted 20 minutes. Thomas asked the expected questions. Education. Prior households. Approach to discipline. Isadora answered each one with the practiced ease of a woman who had been rehearsing this conversation for weeks. Which be somewhat true, but not the whole truth. You come with no formal references, Thomas said. Yes, but I come with results, she replied. References speak to the past. I prefer to demonstrate the present. He looked at her. That feeling again, the word he couldn't place, sitting somewhere at the back of his mind. He pushed it aside. My children are not straightforward. Isadora shrugged. Children rarely are, Your Grace. That is generally not the child's fault. His brows furrowed, but his eyes twinkled. My eldest, he said carefully. She was the reason the last 3 nannies quit. Then I guess I'll need to meet her. He studied her for a moment. Then he stood, which meant the interview was over. Isadora stood as well, smoothing her grey dress. I'll show you to the nursery, he said. They walked in silence up the wide staircase. The house was beautiful and quietly sad in the way that houses get when the person who made them warm is no longer in them. Isadora noticed it in the details, a dried flower left too long in a vase. A child's drawing pinned crookedly to the wall outside the nursery with no one having thought to straighten it. Helena, she thought. You were everywhere in this house. And now you're gone. The ache of it sat low in her chest. She had no time for it. Thomas stopped outside a closed door. He knocked twice. Silence. He pushed the door open, and Isadora followed him in. The nursery was large and bright, and currently inhabited by what appeared to be a full-scale military operation. 2 children were seated at a low table, a boy of about 6 with a sketchpad open in front of him, and a small girl, barely 3, who had a crown made of curtain fringe on her head, and a look of absolute authority on her tiny face. The 3rd child was missing. Rosalind, Thomas called out, and was met with complete silence. Isadora stepped further into the room and looked up. Rosalind was seated on top of the wardrobe. 8 years old. Arms folded. Watching the door with the focused assessment of someone who had been disappointed before and intended to get ahead of it this time. Thomas pressed his fingers to his brow. Rosalind, come down. But I'm observing, Rosalind said. You are sitting on furniture. He said sternly. I'm observing from the furniture. Rosalind countered almost immediately. The little one with the curtain crown pointed at Isadora. Daddy, who's that? Lady Elspeth, Thomas started. Is she the new nanny? Rosalind said, from the wardrobe. Her eyes hadn't moved from Isadora. Sharp. Measuring. Green. Isadora looked up at her. And the breath left her body. No. Those eyes. Those are Celine's eyes. Her sister's eyes. Luminous and unmistakable. Looking down at her from the top of a wardrobe in an English manor house like they had every right to be there. Isadora's hands were completely still at her sides. Her face gave nothing. But inside, something cracked clean open. She breathed through it. 1 breath. 2. Then she looked up at Rosalind and said, perfectly calm, "I hear you're very difficult to impress." Rosalind's eyes narrowed. "Who told you that?" "Your last 3 nannies," Isadora answered softly, "on their way out." There was a small silence, then the smallest, most reluctant twitch crossed Rosalind's face. "You can come in," she said, and climbed down from the wardrobe with the dignity of a head of state. Behind her, Thomas watched. He had not seen his daughter acknowledge a new arrival in 4 months. He looked at this woman, this Miss Clara Whitmore, with her composed grey dress and her one travelling bag, and that single loose curl escaping at the nape of her neck, and a feeling he couldn't name settled in his chest again. Stronger this time. "Where do I know you from?" he thought to himself. But he said nothing. Instead, he adjusted his cufflink and excused himself. He walked back to his study and stood at the window for a long moment, looking at nothing in particular. And in the drawer of his desk, locked and untouched, his late father's journal sat in the dark, waiting. 3 days. That was how long it took Isadora to win the children. Not because she tried. Because she didn't. The first morning, Henry didn't come to breakfast. The butler explained it with the tired resignation of a man who had stopped being surprised. Lord Henry, age 6, had barricaded himself in the library. Again. He did this when the house felt too loud, which lately was most of the time. Isadora didn't ask for a key. She walked to the library, sat down on the floor outside the closed door, pulled the nearest book off the shelf beside her, and began to read aloud. A botany treatise, as it happened. Not exactly gripping material. But she read anyway. Unhurried. Warm. Like she had nowhere else to be. By page 4, the door cracked open an inch. She didn't look up. By page 11, she could hear him on the other side, the soft shift of small feet settling on the floor, the creak of the door opening a little wider. She kept reading, and by page 20, Henry opened the door fully, sat down directly across from her with his sketchpad clutched to his chest, and looked at her with the careful eyes of a child who had been disappointed too many times to rush into trust. She finished the paragraph. Closed the book. Looked at him. "What are you drawing?" she asked. He hesitated. Then, slowly, he turned the sketchpad around. It was the garden. Detailed. The stone wall, the rose beds, the exact way the morning light fell between the hedgerows. The proportions were extraordinary for a 6-year-old. Isadora didn't say how lovely it was. She didn't say what a talented boy. She leaned forward and studied it properly. Took her time. "The shading on the garden wall," she said. "How did you get the light right on that side?" Henry blinked. Nobody had ever asked him that before. His whole face changed, like a window opening. "I used the side of the pencil," he said, sitting up straighter. "If you press too hard it goes wrong, you have to. Here, I'll show you." He was talking before he'd decided to. The words were just coming out. Isadora listened to every single one. Elspeth required considerably less strategy. She attached herself to Isadora's skirt within the first hour of the second morning, announced with great seriousness that they were now best friends, and demanded a biscuit as confirmation of the arrangement. Isadora gave her the biscuit, and Elspeth considered this more than sufficient. Rosalind was the last. And the most important. She didn't circle, she didn't test. She simply watched, from doorways, from the top of the stairs, from the far end of the schoolroom table, with those green eyes that made Isadora's chest ache every single time. Celine. Every time I look at her, I see Celine. Isadora didn't push or perform warmth to win the child over. She just existed in the house, competently, quietly, and without any agenda. She reorganized the nursery. She taught Henry the Latin names of every plant in his garden sketches. She let Elspeth wear the curtain crown to dinner and said nothing about it. On the third day, Rosalind sat down across from her at the schoolroom table, folded her hands, and looked at her directly. "Why are your eyes the same color as mine?" she asked. The room went very still. Isadora kept her face completely neutral. Her hands rested easy on the table. "Some things in this world look like coincidence," she said quietly, "but feel like something more. What do you think it means?" Rosalind considered this for a long time. The way only certain children do. "I think," she said finally, "that maybe you were meant to come here." Something split open quietly inside Isadora's chest. She kept smiling. Steady and warm. "Helena," Isadora thought. "She has your certainty as well as your eyes. And she has absolutely no idea who she is." But neither did Isadora. Not yet. Not fully. But she was beginning to understand that the documents in the old Duke's study were not the only reason fate had walked her through those iron gates. That evening, Isadora found herself in the garden. She hadn't planned it. She just needed air. Space to breathe away from those eyes that looked too much like her dead sister's face. The sun was low. The roses along the stone wall had gone amber in the fading light. She heard the footsteps on the gravel and didn't turn around. "I didn't think anyone else used this part of the garden," Thomas said. "I needed the air, Your Grace. I apologize if I'm intruding." "You're not." He stopped a few feet away, looking at the garden, not at her. Like he'd also just wandered out here and wasn't entirely sure why. They stood in silence for a moment. It was not uncomfortable. That was the problem. "How are they?" he asked honestly. She glanced at him. He was looking straight ahead, his jaw set in that particular way of a man bracing himself for an answer he doesn't want. "Henry is lonely," she said. "Not naughty. Lonely. He needs to be asked about his work, not just praised for it. There's a difference." Thomas said nothing, but something in his expression moved. "Elspeth is perfectly fine," Isadora continued. "She's 3. She wants biscuits and someone to listen to her. Both are easily managed." "And Rosalind?" He couldn't help but ask. A pause. "Rosalind is watching to see if you'll leave her too." The silence that followed was a different kind. Thomas turned to look at her. She met his gaze. "She's not angry," Isadora said. "She's frightened. She lost her mother. And she's been waiting for the next loss ever since. Children that age, they test people to see if they'll stay." He looked at her for a long moment. She lost her mother. Something moved behind his eyes. Old, private, and enormous. "You speak as though you know what that's like," he said. "I know what it's like to lose people," she said simply. "And to rebuild after." He held her gaze a beat too long. That feeling again. The word on the tip of his tongue that refused to surface. "My wife used to say something like that," he said quietly. "That children need to be known. Not just managed." Isadora couldn't help but smile. "She sounds like she was a remarkable woman." "She was." Thomas sighed. His voice dropped. No performance in it. Just the plain, worn truth of a man who had loved someone and still carried the shape of the loss. "She made every room feel like it was glad she was in it," he continued. Isadora looked at the garden. "Your children have that quality as well, Your Grace," she said. He looked at her again. She could feel it, that weight of his attention. Steel blue and steady and entirely, dangerously focused. "Yes," he said softly. "I suppose they do." Neither of them spoke for another moment. Then the dinner bell rang from inside the house, and the spell broke. Isadora excused herself and walked back toward the house without looking back. She didn't need to look back because she could still feel him watching. Right now, Isadora is holding herself together by a thread, and Thomas can't shake the feeling that he knows her from somewhere. But what neither of them knows yet is about to change everything. If this story has you hooked, hit that like button, subscribe, and share it, because what's coming next? Nobody is ready. The carriage arrived 2 days later. White horses, a liveried driver, and a woman who stepped down from it like she was already deciding which parts of the house she intended to redecorate. Lady Victoria Ashby. She was blonde, pale-eyed, flawlessly put together in a cream silk day dress with a parasol she didn't need but carried anyway. Beautiful the way certain things are beautiful, precisely, deliberately, and entirely for effect. Thomas met her in the entry hall. Isadora was coming down the stairs with Henry and Elspeth on their way to the garden. She saw them first. Victoria's eyes swept the staircase in the efficient way of a woman cataloguing a room. Her gaze moved over Henry, over Elspeth, over Isadora, and then straight past her, like she wasn't there. Isadora kept walking. She kept her face perfectly neutral, but she filed it away. Every detail, the deliberate non-acknowledgement, the particular angle of Victoria's smile when she turned it on Thomas, the way her gloved hand rested on his arm, light, proprietary, practiced. She's not in love with him, Isadora thought. She's in love with what he is. She walked the children out to the garden and said nothing. Henry looked up at her. He'd been watching too. I don't like her, he said. Henry, Isadora said mildly. She didn't say hello to us. No, Isadora agreed. She didn't. Henry went back to his sketchpad. That evening, he showed Isadora a new drawing. She looked at it for a long moment. It was Victoria. The likeness was accurate. The expression he'd captured on her face was pointed, to say the least. He looked up with the hopeful guilt of someone expecting to be told off. Isadora studied it carefully. The light in her left eye, she said, is very well observed. She handed it back. And Henry grinned so hard he looked like a different child entirely. 3 days after Victoria's visit, Thomas passed the library doorway. He wasn't looking for anything. He was on his way to the study. He stopped. Isadora was at the long library table, a Latin grammar open in front of her and both children sitting across from her. Rosalind was conjugating verbs. Henry was illustrating his notes with small drawings in the margins of his page, which should have been a problem and somehow wasn't, because Isadora had clearly decided it wasn't worth fighting and had turned it into a reward system instead. Again, she said to Rosalind. Faster. You already know this. I'm thinking, Rosalind said. You've already thought. Now just say it. Rosalind said it, fast and correctly. Good, Isadora said. No applause, or fuss. Just the steady, matter-of-fact acknowledgement of someone who expected the child to succeed and was not surprised that she had. Rosalind sat up straighter. Thomas stood in the doorway and watched. He'd been meaning to retrieve a book. He no longer remembered which one. Henry looked up and spotted him. His face lit. Papa. Miss Whitmore says my margin drawings count as visual notation. Does she? Thomas said. It aids retention, Isadora said, without looking up from the grammar. He remembers vocabulary significantly better when he draws the word. I've tested it. Thomas looked at her. The light from the library window fell across her face at a particular angle, the auburn of her hair catching it, her green eyes moving over the page in front of her, completely at ease and completely unaware of him watching. Where do I know you from? He still couldn't place it. Thomas ended up retrieving no book. Instead, he left the doorway and walked to his study, sat down at his desk, and his eyes dropped, without meaning to the locked drawer. His father's journal. He'd locked it the day after the funeral. Told himself he wasn't ready. He pulled the drawer open. He picked up the journal. He stared at the cover for a long moment. Then he put it back. Locked the drawer. Not yet. He pressed both palms flat on the desk and looked at the wall. From somewhere above him, through the ceiling, he could faintly hear Elspeth demanding a second biscuit at considerable volume. And then, quieter, steadier, Isadora's voice, calm and warm, negotiating Elspeth down to 1.5. Thomas sat alone in his study. And for the first time in 2 years, without entirely meaning to, he smiled. It was a Tuesday night when Thomas Blackwell finally ran out of reasons not to open the journal. He'd tried everything else first. The estate ledgers. A letter to his solicitor that didn't need writing. 2 glasses of brandy that didn't do what brandy was supposed to do. By midnight, the house was completely silent. He sat at his father's desk. The candle burned low, and the locked drawer sat in front of him like it had been sitting in front of him every night for 3 weeks, patient, immovable, waiting. He pulled out his key. Just open it. The journal was old. Dark leather, worn at the corners. His father's handwriting on the first page, careful, precise, the hand of a man who chose his words with the same deliberateness he chose everything else. Thomas turned to the first entry. He read. An hour passed. He didn't move. The candle burned lower. His father's words moved across the page in that careful, deliberate hand, and with every paragraph, something cold and slow spread through Thomas's chest. Rosalind was not Helena's daughter. He read it again. The same sentence. Same words. Rosalind was not Helena's daughter. A woman named Marguerite had come to Wycliffe Hall in the dead of night 11 years ago. She had a baby in her arms and a dying message on her lips. The baby's mother, a young noblewoman of Caribbean blood, had been killed that same night. Her husband too. Assassinated. Every loose end tied off by men sent by people who wanted something erased. The baby was the only survivor. And his father, his careful, guilt-ridden, meticulous father, had looked at his son's wife weeping in the room above him over a child that hadn't survived, and made a decision he spent the rest of his life writing apologies for. He placed the baby in the nursery. He told the household the Duchess's child had lived after all. Thomas sat with that for a long time. Rosalind. His Rosalind. Who argued about everything. Who sat on top of wardrobes. Who had climbed into his bed every night for a month after Helena died and pressed her small cold feet against his legs and said nothing, just stayed, because she understood, at 8 years old, that sometimes staying was the only language that mattered. His hands were completely still on the desk. He turned the page. His father had written the baby's name. Her mother's name. Lady Celine Fennick. Daughter of Baron Edouard Fennick of Trinidad. And then, the sister. The one his father had spent years trying to locate. The one who'd disappeared before he could find her. The one he believed had been taken and sold somewhere in the Caribbean trade routes. Lady Isadora Fennick. Thomas stopped breathing. He read the name again. Lady Isadora Fennick. He turned back a page. Then forward. Looking for something. Some way the words meant something different from what they said. They didn't. He closed the journal. He sat in the dark for a very long time. His father had kept documentation. Correspondence from Baron Fennick himself. Letters. A copy of the will. Records that proved Isadora's identity, her legitimacy, her inheritance. Thomas had found that satchel of papers 2 weeks ago while clearing the study. Old Caribbean business correspondence, he'd assumed. He'd burned it with the rest. I burned it. He pressed the heel of his hand against his forehead. I burned all of it. The only thing left was the journal. And a journal written by a guilty old man was not a legal document. It was not proof of anything a court would accept. He had destroyed the only evidence that could have given Isadora back her name. He sat with that too. And then, the part he was least proud of. The thought that came next. She doesn't know Rosalind is here. He looked at the ceiling. He thought of Rosalind pressing her cold feet against his legs in the dark. Rosalind on top of the wardrobe, saying, I think you were meant to come here, to a woman who. His thought trailed off, and was replaced by another. She'll take her, he realized. Thomas closed his eyes. If she finds out, she'll take her. He locked the journal back in the drawer. He stood up. He went to bed. He did not sleep. The days that followed were different. Not dramatically. Not in any way the children would have noticed. But Isadora noticed. Thomas was still courteous. Still present at the children's evening meal. Still asked after their lessons with genuine attention. But the doorway lingering had stopped. The garden at dusk, stopped. The way his eyes used to find her across a room and stay a half-second longer than necessary, stopped. He had rebuilt a professional distance between them with the quiet efficiency of a man who knew exactly what he was doing and had decided it was necessary. Something changed, she thought. Something had happened. She filed it away. She didn't press. She was very good at waiting. It was 3 nights later when Elspeth woke up screaming. It started at 1:30 in the morning, a sharp, sudden cry that cut through the silence of the house like a blade. Isadora was at the nursery door before she was fully awake. Elspeth sat up in her small bed, both hands pressed over her ear, her face red and crumpled with pain and confusion and the particular outrage of a 3-year-old whose body had betrayed her in the night. It hurts, she sobbed. It hurts. I know, my love. Isadora was already beside her. I know. Let me see. She checked. Ear pain, she'd seen it before. She went to the washstand, found the small bottle of warm oil she'd kept in the nursery for exactly this kind of night, and came back. She sat with Elspeth in the low lamplight for 2 hours. She warmed the oil between her palms first before applying it. She kept her voice low and steady the entire time. And when the child's crying slowed and her eyes grew heavy and confused and frightened again, Isadora did the only thing she could think to do. She began to sing. Not an English nursery rhyme. Something older. Something from the Caribbean, half French, half English, the kind of song that lives in the body before it lives in the memory. Low and warm and rhythmic, like the sound of the sea at night. She hadn't sung it in 11 years. Yet it came back to her like breathing. Elspeth went still. Her eyes moved to Isadora's face, wide and blinking and slowly going soft. By the end of the second verse, the child was asleep. Isadora sat in the quiet for a long moment. The lamp flickering. The small warm weight of Elspeth's hand still loosely holding 2 of her fingers. She didn't know Thomas was awake. She didn't know his room shared a wall with the nursery. She didn't know he had been lying in the dark listening since the first cry, too aware that going in would overstep, too aware of the woman already in there who was handling it with a competence that made him feel, in some complicated way, simultaneously relieved and wrecked. He lay in the dark and listened to a song he had never heard before. Something in his chest tightened in a way he couldn't name. He pressed the back of his hand against his mouth. "Don't." He stared at the ceiling. He lay there long after the singing stopped and the house went quiet again. The following morning, Thomas came to breakfast earlier than usual. Isadora was already there, pouring tea for Henry and Rosalind, her auburn hair pinned back, and a smudge of chalk on the left cuff of her grey dress that she clearly hadn't noticed. Thomas sat down. He picked up the newspaper, but did not read it. Rosalind told him at length about the Latin verbs she'd mastered yesterday. He listened. He asked 2 questions about them that made her face light up in a way that she immediately tried to hide because she was 8 and apparently, dignity mattered. Henry showed him a sketch, the garden again, but with a new figure in it. A woman in a grey dress reading under the oak tree. Thomas looked at it for a moment. "That's Miss Whitmore," Henry said. "Yes," Thomas said. "I can see that." He set the sketch down carefully. He picked up his tea. Isadora was looking at the window. Not at him. But her hands had stilled on the teapot for exactly 1 second. He noticed that too. The meal ended, and the children went to the schoolroom. Thomas stayed in his chair a moment longer than he needed to. "Miss Whitmore," he called out. She turned. "How is Elspeth this morning?" "Better." The ear pain passed around 3. She slept through till 8. She paused for a moment. "I'll keep an eye on it." "Thank you," he said. "For last night." Something flickered across her face. "It's nothing, Your Grace. It's what I'm here for." Is that really all it is, he thought, but he didn't say that. He nodded once, and simply walked out of the room. Isadora stood alone in the dining room for a moment. She set the teapot down. Her jaw was perfectly calm. Her hands perfectly still. His pulling away, she thought. And his doing it deliberately, why? She didn't have an answer yet. But she walked to the window, and she looked out at the gravel drive, and she thought about what she'd come here for, the documents, the proof, the name that had been stolen from her. She thought about a locked study she still hadn't accessed. She thought about Rosalind's eyes. And somewhere underneath all of it, underneath the mission and the borrowed name and 11 years of discipline, something else moved. Something quieter. Something she didn't want to look at directly. She turned away from the window. She went to teach the Latin lesson. That afternoon, a letter arrived at Wycliffe Hall. Not for Thomas, but for Isadora. Or in this instance, Miss Clara Whitmore. The butler brought it to the schoolroom doorway with an uncertain expression. The handwriting on the outside was a lady's maid's hand, formal and careful. But it had been redirected twice. The edges were worn. It had clearly been traveling for a very long time. Isadora took it without expression. She recognized the handwriting on the inside immediately. Her hand tightened on the page. Helena. Isadora didn't open the letter in the schoolroom. She tucked it into the pocket of her dress, finished the lesson, supervised Henry's afternoon sketching hour, sat with Elspeth through her nap, and waited. She was very good at waiting. But her hand went to that pocket 3 times without her meaning it to. The garden was empty by late afternoon. She found a stone bench at the far end near the rose wall, far enough from the house that no window looked directly down at it, and she sat, and she broke the seal. The letter was long. Several pages. The handwriting was Helena's, looping and quick and warm, the kind of handwriting that looked exactly like its owner. Isadora's throat tightened before she'd read a single word. Helena. She started at the beginning. My dearest Isadora. If this letter has found you, then something of the miracle I prayed for has finally come through. I have written to you so many times in the dark. I was never sure any of it would reach you. But I couldn't stop. You of all people know exactly how I am. You always said my stubbornness was my worst quality. I prefer to call it loyalty. Isadora pressed her lips together. She kept reading. Helena wrote about the children. About Henry's drawings and Rosalind's impossible certainty about everything, and the baby Elspeth who had arrived in the world screaming and hadn't really stopped. She wrote about Wycliffe Hall in winter and how the east corridor got so cold you could see your breath. She wrote about Thomas. He is the most honorable man I have ever known in my life, Isadora. And that is both his greatest quality and his most maddening one. He carries everything alone. He always has. He will smile at me and tell me he is perfectly fine and go sit in his study for 3 hours convincing himself he is managing. He is not always managing. He is just very good at looking like he is. Don't let him do that. If you ever find him, don't let him carry it all alone. He needs someone who will not accept the smile as a final answer. Isadora sat very still. She read that paragraph twice. Then Helena wrote about Rosalind. Carefully. Obliquely. In the particular way of someone choosing words like they are choosing steps across uncertain ground. There is something about Rosalind that I have long thought about. Something I noticed and then understood, and then carried quietly, because some truths are too large and too fragile to speak aloud. I think you will understand it when you see her. I believe you will know it in the first moment. And I believe, I have always believed, that you are the only person in the world I would trust with what it means. Isadora's hand had gone completely still on the page. I am not frightened, Helena wrote. I am only sorry I will not see what happens next. I think it will be extraordinary. You were always extraordinary, even when the world did everything in its power to make you believe otherwise. Go find my children. I know you will love them. And I know they will love you back. And Isadora. She stopped to breathe. Take care of him too. He doesn't know he needs it. And that's exactly how you'll know he does. The last line. I miss you every single day. I never stopped looking. I never stopped believing you were out there somewhere, living, fighting, being exactly who you were always meant to be. I love you, and I always will. From your darling, Helena. Isadora folded the letter. She pressed it flat against her knee with both palms and looked at the roses along the stone wall and said nothing and felt everything. She knew. Helena had known about Rosalind. She had suspected, and had written it all into a letter addressed to the one person she trusted and sent it out into the world not knowing if it would ever arrive. And it had arrived 11 years later. 2 months after Helena was already in the ground. The grief came quietly. The kind that doesn't announce itself, it just arrives, sits down beside you, and makes itself at home. Isadora pressed her fingers briefly over her eyes. Don't. She straightened her spine. She folded the letter smaller. She tucked it back into her pocket. She looked up. Thomas was standing at the far edge of the garden path. He hadn't made a sound. He'd clearly been on his evening walk and found her there, then stopped, and from the expression on his face, he'd been standing there long enough to see something he wasn't meant to see. Not the letter, he couldn't have read it from there. But he noticed her face. The moment before she'd composed it again. He crossed the garden slowly and stopped beside the bench. He didn't ask if she was all right. And she was grateful for that. She looked at the roses, and he followed her gaze quietly. After a moment, she said, "Did you love her?" There was a pause before Thomas finally spoke. "Who?" "Your wife," she answered. Thomas let out a long, deep sigh. "With all of my heart," he said. She nodded slowly. And the children? More than I know how to say. She looked at him then. He was still watching the garden, his jaw set, the grief worn naturally in the lines of his face the way old weather is worn in stone. She would have been glad of that, Isadora said softly. He turned, and their eyes met. Something shifted in the air between them, quiet and large, but neither of them reached for it. Do you know, he started, but suddenly stopped. He shook his head once and chuckled softly. Forgive me. I don't know what I was going to say. I do, Isadora thought. She stood up and smoothed her dress. Good night, Your Grace, she said. She walked back toward the house. She didn't look back. He stood alone in the garden with the last of the light going out and something sitting in his chest that had run out of room to stay quiet. Thomas Blackwell is falling and he knows it. Isadora is trying to hold the line and she's losing. But while these two are standing in gardens pretending not to feel everything, Lady Victoria Ashby has just received a very interesting report. If this story is gripping you, hit that like button, subscribe, and share it right now. The report arrived at the Ashby estate on a Friday morning. Victoria was at her writing desk when her man of business set it in front of her. He was a man who was deliberately paid to be discreet. The man said nothing and quickly left after dropping the report. She picked it up and read it once. Quickly. Then she set it down and looked out the window for a long moment. The report on Miss Clara Whitmore was thorough. 2 prior households, both confirmed. Edinburgh records, confirmed. Education, confirmed. Mixed heritage, noted without comment because her man of business was discreet. And then, at the bottom, a small detail. A footnote that almost wasn't included. A Barbados auction record. 1808. A young woman freed by an English lord. Blackwell of Wycliffe. Victoria picked up the paper again, and read that line again. Her pale eyes moved slowly across it. She set it back down. She reached for her pen and wrote a single response to her man of business. Confirm the name. All of it. She sealed it. She rang for the footman. Then she sat back in her chair and folded her hands in her lap, then looked at nothing in particular with the particular stillness of a woman who has just found the exact piece she needed, but was in no hurry to use it. Patience, she told herself. Wait until it matters most. She arrived at Wycliffe Hall the following Tuesday. No announcement, or any prior arrangement. The carriage simply appeared on the drive at 10:30 in the morning, and Victoria descended from it in pale blue silk like she was arriving at her own home. Thomas received her in the front sitting room with the controlled courtesy of a man who had been doing everything correctly for 10 months and was beginning to understand, in some dim and reluctant corner of his mind, that correct was not the same as right. Victoria kissed his cheek. She sat quietly and accepted tea. She was warm and absolutely impeccable. She asked about the estate. She asked about his meetings in London that week. She was, as always, exactly what she was supposed to be. Thomas answered her questions as usual. He was also, as always, exactly what he was supposed to be. Neither of them were being themselves. 20 minutes into the visit, Victoria set down her cup. I thought I might look in on the children, she said. If you don't mind. Thomas looked at her. Something in him wanted to say no. But he didn't know why. He had no reason he could articulate. Of course, he said. Victoria made her way upstairs alone. She didn't go to the nursery immediately. She paused at the top of the staircase and listened to the house, the sound of a lesson in progress, Henry's voice asking a question, and Rosalind's voice answering it before the teacher could. She followed the sound to the schoolroom. She opened the door. Isadora looked up from the table. For 1 second, just one, something moved across Victoria's face. Recognition. Gone before it fully formed. She smiled softly. Miss Whitmore. I hope I'm not interrupting. Not at all, my lady. Isadora stood. Children, say good morning to Lady Victoria. Rosalind said good morning with the tone of someone completing an obligation. Henry said it while looking at his sketchpad. Elspeth waved one biscuit-covered hand and went back to her drawing. Victoria's smile didn't move. But her eyes did. moving over the room, over the children, over Isadora with the slow efficiency of someone reading a document. "They seem well settled," she said pleasantly. "They are," Isadora said. "And you've been here for how long now?" 6 weeks, she asked. Isadora forced a smile. "Nearly 7, my lady." "My." Victoria tilted her head slightly. "How quickly the time goes." A pause. "Children, would you mind if I borrowed Miss Whitmore for just a moment?" Rosalind looked at Isadora. And Isadora looked at Rosalind. "Finish the reading exercise. I'll be right outside." She followed Victoria into the corridor. Victoria walked to the window at the far end, away from the schoolroom door, and turned. The smile was gone. "I'll be brief," Victoria said. Her voice was still pleasant. Pleasantness was simply her register, like other women had warmth. "I've had you looked into, Miss Clara Whitmore." Isadora said nothing as Victoria said the name the way you say something you know is a costume. "Edinburgh. 2 households. Impeccable references." She paused. "And a rather interesting footnote in a Barbados trading record from 1808. The corridor was very quiet. Isadora's face gave absolutely nothing. "I'm going to give you 2 choices," Victoria continued. Her voice had not risen. "You may leave. This week. Quietly. I'll write you an excellent reference myself. And you'll never return to this county." A moment passed. "Or you may stay. And by Thursday, every society column in London will carry a very interesting story about the Duke of Wycliffe's nanny, her origins, her borrowed name, and the particular nature of her interest in her employer." Victoria smiled again. "Just slightly. I don't think either of you would recover from that." The silence stretched. Then Isadora spoke. Her voice was completely level. "You're frightened of children." Victoria blinked. For once, just once, she had no immediate response. 3 children, Isadora said quietly. "That is what this comes down to. You are frightened of 3 children and the way they look at their father when you are in the room." She held Victoria's gaze without flinching. "That is a very small reason to destroy someone, my lady." She turned. She walked back to the schoolroom. She opened the door. She sat back down at the table. She picked up where the reading lesson had stopped. Her hands were completely steady. Her heart was slamming against her ribs like it was trying to get out. 2 choices. Victoria's voice in her head, pleasant and precise as a blade. "Leave. Or burn." Isadora looked at Rosalind across the table. At those green eyes that were her dead sister's eyes in a living child's face. "I am not leaving," she thought. "I am not leaving this child." But the documents were still locked in Thomas's study. And now the clock had started. Isadora didn't sleep that night. She lay in the narrow nanny's bed with the ceiling above her and Victoria's voice in her head. Pleasant, precise, inevitable, and she stared at the dark and thought. "Leave. Or burn." 2 choices. That was what Victoria had said. But there was a third choice Victoria hadn't offered because it hadn't occurred to her that a woman in Isadora's position would be capable of it. Fight. She was at the breakfast table before anyone else the following morning. Composed. Hair pinned. Grey dress. Not a single thing on her face that hadn't been put there deliberately. When Thomas came in, he looked at her the way he had been looking at her for a week, carefully, from behind the professional distance he'd rebuilt, and something in his expression shifted slightly. He can tell, she thought. He notices everything. "Good morning, Your Grace," she said. "Good morning, Miss Whitmore," he said, pulling out his chair. He picked up the newspaper. "Did you sleep?" A pause. "Just 1 beat too long." "Well enough," she answered. He looked at her over the top of the newspaper. She looked back at him steadily. He set the paper down. "Is something wrong?" "No," she said. He kept looking at her. "Stop that," she thought. "Stop looking at me like you can see through everything." "The children will be ready for their morning lesson at 9, she said. "Henry asked if you might look at his new sketches this afternoon. He hasn't said so directly, but he's been angling toward it for 2 days." Thomas's expression softened in that particular way it did when his children were mentioned, quiet and unguarded and entirely real. "After the estate meeting," he said. "Tell him I'll come to the library at 4. "I'll tell him." She stood. "Excuse me, Your Grace." She walked out. Thomas sat alone with his newspaper and his untouched tea, and the distinct feeling that something was happening in his house that he didn't fully understand yet. He was right. The library. 4 o'clock. Henry had been ready since 3. He'd arranged his sketches in a careful sequence on the long library table, oldest to newest, smallest to largest, with the concentrated precision of someone preparing an exhibition. He'd even dusted the table himself, which Isadora had noticed and said nothing about because pointing it out would have embarrassed him. Thomas arrived exactly at 4. He stood at the table and looked. The sketches moved through the last 7 weeks like a diary neither of them knew was being kept. The garden in early morning. The nursery window from outside. Elspeth asleep in her chair with her crown of curtain fringe still on, mouth slightly open. Rosalind at the schoolroom table with her chin resting on her fist, looking like she was solving something enormous. And then the ones from the last few weeks. Thomas reading by the fire. Thomas in the garden with his hands behind his back, looking at the tree line. Thomas laughing. Henry had drawn that one from memory, and it was the most technically imperfect sketch on the table and somehow the most alive. Thomas went quiet when he saw that one. And then the last sketch. The newest. All 5 of them. In the garden. Isadora standing beside Thomas beneath the oak tree. The children around them in various states of occupation. Henry drawing, Elspeth ruling something, Rosalind standing straight with her chin up. Henry had given Isadora a small crown. Not a curtain fringe one. A real one. Thomas stood very still looking at it. Henry watched him from across the table with the careful eyes of a child waiting for a verdict he tried very hard to pretend didn't matter. "Henry," Thomas said. "Yes, Papa." "These are extraordinary." Henry exhaled. His whole body shifted, like a door coming off a latch. Thomas looked up from the sketch. Isadora was standing at the far end of the table, having slipped in quietly at some point without either of them noticing. She was looking at the last sketch too. She hadn't seen the crown before. When she looked up, her green eyes met Thomas's across the table. Neither of them said anything. Henry looked between them with the satisfied expression of someone whose work here was done. 2 days later, Thomas offered to teach Isadora how to ride. It came out of nowhere, or seemed to. They were crossing the stable yard and he made the observation that the mare, Cressida, had been under-exercised, and that the children's morning rides would benefit from a second adult who was confident on horseback. "I can ride, Your Grace," Isadora said. He looked at her. "Then perhaps a refresher," he said. She looked at him for a moment. He looked back. "Very well," she said. The lesson lasted an hour. For the first 4 minutes of it, she pretended to need more help than she did. She wasn't entirely sure why she did it. Only that watching him be patient, the way he adjusted her grip without making it feel like a correction, the way he talked to Cressida while helping Isadora settle into the saddle, the occasional self-deprecating aside when he over-explained something, was doing something to her chest that she had no good name for. Then he noticed. She felt the exact moment he figured it out, a small pause, and then he looked up at her from beside the horse with something shifting in those steel blue eyes. And he laughed. Fully. Openly. The kind of laugh that had been missing from his face for 2 years and arrived now like light coming through a door suddenly thrown open. That sound, she thought. That sound is the most dangerous thing I have encountered in 11 years. She smiled back before she could stop herself. A real one. Not the composed professional one. He saw it. He stopped laughing, but the warmth of it stayed on his face, and for one unguarded moment they were just 2 people on a Tuesday morning in a stable yard being completely, helplessly, genuinely themselves. Then Cressida shifted impatiently beneath her and the moment broke. "Again," Thomas said. His voice was different now. Lighter. Properly, this time. "I was being proper," she retorted. "I would beg to differ," he replied with a soft chuckle. She raised an eyebrow. And he raised one back. This time, Isadora rode properly. He watched with his arms folded and a smile he was clearly trying to keep off his face, and failing completely. Victoria came for a ballroom inspection that Friday. She was planning an engagement announcement party. She had been planning it for 2 months with the detailed efficiency of a woman who understood that events, like strategies, required infrastructure. She walked through the ballroom with Thomas beside her, her pale eyes moving over the space with that particular appraising quality, noting what she approved of, flagging what she intended to change, and occasionally touching something with one gloved finger like she was already taking ownership of the surface beneath it. Thomas followed. He answered her questions about the guest list. He agreed with her suggestions about the floral arrangements. He was, as always, precisely what the situation required. He was also, for the first time, acutely and uncomfortably aware of what he was not feeling. They came out of the ballroom into the wide first-floor corridor, and there was Isadora, coming in the opposite direction with Elspeth on her hip. Elspeth was covered in something that was either chalk dust or powdered sugar. Both were plausible. Her curtain crown was on sideways. She had the bright, catastrophic energy of a child who had had an excellent afternoon doing something that was probably not allowed. Isadora had chalk on her left cuff, a pencil tucked behind her ear that she'd clearly forgotten about. Her hair slightly less precise than it had been at breakfast, one long auburn curl loose at her neck. She saw them and stopped. "Your Grace." "My lady." Her voice was perfectly even. Victoria smiled. "Miss Whitmore. What a charming picture." "Lady Elspeth has been practicing her letters," Isadora said. "With her face?" Victoria asked. Elspeth looked at Victoria with great seriousness and pointed at her own chalk-dusted cheek. "That one is a B," she said. Victoria's smile didn't move, but something behind it did. Thomas looked at Isadora. Not at the chalk. Not at the pencil. Just at her. At the loose curl and the steady green eyes and the unconscious ease of a woman who had walked into his house 7 weeks ago and rearranged something fundamental about the quality of the air in it. "Shall we continue?" Victoria said. "Yes," Thomas said. He looked away. He followed Victoria back toward the drawing room. But Isadora felt it. The look. The way it had landed and stayed and said something neither of them had said out loud. She shifted Elspeth to her other hip. "Stop," she told herself. "You are here for the documents. You are here for Rosalind. That is all." She walked down the corridor. She believed herself less every time she said it. That night, Thomas came home late from a society engagement. He'd gone because it was expected. He'd stayed 20 minutes longer than he intended because leaving early required an explanation and he hadn't felt like explaining. The house was quiet and warm when he came through the front door. He handed his coat and hat to the night footman and stood in the entry hall for a moment. He hadn't wanted to go tonight. He'd known that clearly and specifically. He'd wanted to be here. In this house. Where there was Latin being argued about and someone negotiating Elspeth down from 3 biscuits to 1.5 and the sound of a song through a wall he'd lain awake on the other side of. This is a problem, he thought. He went upstairs. He stopped at the nursery out of habit. He always checked when he came in late. He opened the door quietly. 3 children, all asleep. The lamp turned low. He stepped back out and found Isadora in the corridor. She'd heard the carriage. Of course she had. She heard everything in this house. She'd come to check, the way she always did when something disturbed the night. She was in a simple grey wrapper, her hair half-pinned and one long auburn curl loose over her shoulder. Not undressed, entirely proper. And somehow the most intimate thing he'd seen in years. They both stopped. The corridor was very quiet. "They're all asleep," she said. Her voice was low. "Even?" "Yes." He wasn't looking at the nursery door. The candle she was holding threw warm light across her face. Neither of them moved. "I should," she started. "Miss Whitmore." He said it quietly. She stopped. "I don't know what this house would have been without you. These past weeks." A pause. "I needed you to know that." Her breath shifted. Just slightly. Something moved across her face, warm and complicated and 11 years deep, before she pulled it back under control. "Good night, Your Grace," she said softly. She meant it to be final. But it didn't come out that way. "Good night, Miss Whitmore," he said. Neither of them moved for 3 full seconds. Then she turned and walked back to her room. Thomas stood in the corridor alone with one hand pressed flat against the wall and a feeling in his chest that had completely run out of room. The next morning at breakfast, Rosalind said something about her Latin lesson that made both adults laugh at exactly the same moment. Their eyes met over the children's heads. Still laughing. Completely unguarded. Nothing professional between them for just that one bright instant. Rosalind looked between them with the serene expression of someone whose plan was proceeding exactly on schedule. Isadora set down the teapot. And without thinking, without the half-second of calculation she applied to everything, she said, "Thomas." She heard herself say it. She stopped. The color changed in her face, and Thomas went completely still. Not uncomfortable. Not surprised. Still, the way a man goes still when he hears something he has been waiting for without knowing he was waiting. "Forgive me, Your Grace." "Don't," he said quietly. Just that, one word. He picked up his ledger and left the room. Isadora stood at the breakfast table with her hand still on the teapot and her heart doing something she had absolutely no protocol for. Rosalind ate her toast. "You called him Thomas," she said. "I made a mistake," Isadora said. Rosalind considered this. "Did you?" Isadora said nothing, and Rosalind went back to eating her toast. 3 days passed after the breakfast incident. Thomas didn't mention it. Isadora didn't mention it. The house carried on, lessons, meals, the children's noise filling the corridors the way water fills a space, finding every corner. Everything looked exactly the same as it had before, but it wasn't. Something had shifted in the atmosphere of the house the way pressure shifts before a storm, imperceptible unless you knew what you were feeling for. Isadora knew. She felt it every time Thomas passed the library doorway and didn't stop. Every time their eyes met across the dinner table and held 1 second longer than they should before one of them looked away. Every time she said "Your Grace" and heard the word land between them like a door being held shut with both hands. "Don't," she told herself. Every morning. "You are here for the documents." She believed herself less every time. Victoria arrived on a Tuesday. No carriage announcement. No prior arrangement. Just the sound of wheels on the gravel at 10:30, and then her voice in the entry hall below. Pleasant, unhurried, like someone returning to a place they already owned. Isadora heard it from the schoolroom. She kept her eyes on the grammar text in front of her. "Continue reading, Rosalind," she said. Rosalind read. But her eyes moved once to the door and back. 20 minutes later, footsteps in the corridor. A knock. The door opened. Victoria stood in the frame. "Miss Whitmore." That smile. Precise as a signature. "I wonder if I might have a word." The corridor. Same window as last time. Same distance from the schoolroom door. This time Victoria didn't bother with pleasantries. She opened her small silk reticule and withdrew a folded paper. She held it out. Isadora looked at it without taking it. "Go on," Victoria said. "Read it." She took it. Unfolded it. It was the Barbados auction record. The date. The trading post. The description. And at the bottom, freed by an English lord. Blackwell of Wycliffe. Her name wasn't on it. But it didn't need to be. "My man of business is very thorough," Victoria said. "He's confirmed everything now. Your name. Your family. Where you came from and why you're really here." She tilted her head slightly. "It's quite a story, actually. Kidnapped noblewoman reinvents herself as a governess and infiltrates the household of the very man who freed her. The society papers would lose their minds." Isadora folded the paper. She held it back out. Victoria didn't take it. "Keep it," she said. "Consider it a reminder." A pause. "My offer still stands. Leave this week. Quietly. I'll write the reference myself, glowing, no questions asked. You take your borrowed name and whatever dignity you have left and you disappear." The corridor was very quiet. "And if I don't?" Isadora said. "Then by Thursday, Thomas Blackwell's engagement is the least interesting thing anyone in London is talking about." Victoria's voice remained pleasant all the way through. That was the most unsettling part. There was no heat in it. No anger. Just the clean, efficient delivery of someone removing an obstacle. I'll make sure they know everything. The name. The auction. The reason you're really here. And I'll add my own particular interpretation of the nature of your relationship with the Duke." She smiled. "Perception is everything in this world, Miss Whitmore. You know that better than anyone." Isadora stood very still. She looked at this woman, this flawlessly constructed, strategically precise woman, and she felt something she hadn't expected to feel. Not fear. Pity. "You're frightened of children," she said. Victoria blinked. The smile held but the eyes shifted, something unscripted moving through them for just 1 second. "3 children," Isadora continued. Her voice was quiet. Steady. Not unkind. "That is what this is. You stand in doorways and look at those 3 children and you see everything standing between you and what you want, and it frightens you. Not because they are difficult. Because they love him." She looked at Victoria directly. "And you know, somewhere, you know, that he is never going to look at you the way he looks at them. And that terrifies you more than anything I could ever be." Victoria's expression had gone very still. "That is a very small reason," Isadora said, "to try to destroy someone." She put the auction record on the windowsill. She turned. She walked back to the schoolroom. She opened the door. She sat down. "Where were we?" she said. Rosalind looked at her. "Page 42. "Page 42, Isadora said. She opened the book. Her hands were perfectly steady. Inside her chest, an entirely different story. Rosalind waited until the lesson was over and Henry had taken Elspeth downstairs before she spoke. She didn't look up from packing her books. "Is she going to make you leave?" Isadora went still. "What makes you ask that?" I heard her voice in the corridor. Rosalind put her book down. She looked up. Those green eyes, Celine's eyes, direct and unblinking and far too old for an 8-year-old's face. "She doesn't like us. Lady Victoria doesn't know you well enough yet." "That's not what I said." Rosalind's chin lifted slightly. "I said she doesn't like us. There's a difference." Isadora looked at this child for a long moment. "Helena," she thought. "You gave her everything." "I'm not leaving," Isadora said. "Promise." The word landed between them clean and simple and enormous. Isadora thought of every careful thing she'd told herself since arriving at this house. Every reminder to stay detached. Every morning she'd recited the mission like a prayer. The documents. The title. "Rosalind. I'm not leaving," she said again. Rosalind held her gaze for a moment. Then she picked up her book. "Good," she said. And walked out of the schoolroom like the matter was settled. Isadora sat alone at the table for a long moment. Then she stood up. She straightened her dress. She walked down the corridor to Thomas's study. She knocked. Isadora is about to walk into that study and say something she cannot unsay. And Thomas is about to hear something that is going to force his hand on every secret he's been carrying for 2 months. If this story has your heart, hit that like button right now, subscribe, and share it. Because what happens in the next few minutes changes everything for both of them. He opened the door. He took one look at her face and stepped back to let her in. That was the thing about Thomas Blackwell. He didn't ask unnecessary questions when the answer was already visible. She came in. She stood in the middle of the room with her hands clasped in front of her and her back straight, and she told him everything. Not everything. Not the auction. Not who she really was. Not Rosalind. But Victoria. Every word of it. Both conversations. The auction record. The threat. The Thursday deadline. She kept her voice level all the way through. She wasn't asking for rescue. She was giving him information he had a right to. She said so. "Whatever you decide, Your Grace. I simply needed you to know." When she finished, the study was very quiet. Thomas was standing at the window with his back half turned to her. She watched the line of his shoulders, the way they'd tightened incrementally as she spoke and were now very, very still. He turned around. His face was composed. His voice, when it came, was quiet in that particular way of a man who has felt something enormous and has chosen to carry it at a low register. "She threatened you," he said. "In my house." "She?" "In my house," he said again. Still quiet. "Because she is frightened of my children." Isadora didn't answer. He looked at her. And the professional distance, the careful, deliberate, rebuilt distance he'd maintained for 2 weeks, was simply gone. Dissolved. Like it had never been constructed at all. "Isadora," he said. He stopped. The name landed in the room between them. Her real name. From his mouth. As naturally as breathing. He didn't know it was her real name. She knew that. He'd said it by accident. Some unconscious thing reaching past all his careful management and producing the word he didn't know he knew. But she heard it. She heard it in her bones. "Forgive me," he said quickly. "Miss Whitmore." "Don't." Her voice came out soft. She didn't mean to say it. He looked at her. Neither of them moved. The fire in the grate crackled once. The room was warm and close and suddenly very small. "I have been trying," Thomas said slowly, "for 7 weeks, to place where I know you from." He took one step toward her. Then stopped. "I know that I know you. I cannot find it. And it is," he shook his head. "It is making me quite genuinely mad." She breathed. "Tell him," something said. "Now. Tell him." She wasn't ready. "Not yet. Not here. Thomas," she said instead. "Just his name. Not your grace. Not a title. His name, the way you say the name of someone who has stopped being a stranger." He went very still. "Yes," he said. Quietly. "That." They were standing closer than they had ever stood. She didn't know when that happened. Neither did he, probably. It was just the room getting smaller and neither of them making any effort to stop it. His eyes were on her face with that total, undivided attention. The kind that made her feel like everything she'd borrowed and constructed and layered over herself in 11 years had simply become transparent. "He sees me," she thought. "He doesn't know what he's seeing. But he sees me. Whatever she does," Thomas said, "I will handle it. This is not yours to. You are in my house." His voice was low. "Under my name. If anyone comes at you in my house, it becomes mine." He paused. "That is not negotiable." She looked at him for a long moment. "And your engagement," she said. Something moved through his expression. A long silence. "That," he said carefully, "is something I should have addressed considerably before now." He wrote the letter to Victoria that evening. He wrote it alone in his study after the house went quiet. He didn't tell Isadora he was writing it. He wrote it twice. The first version said too much. The second said exactly what needed to be said and nothing more. He ended it with one line. "Your conduct toward members of my household has been unworthy of the Wycliffe name. I will not elaborate further if you do not press me to." He sealed it. He gave it to the night footman with instructions for the morning post. Then he sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling. From somewhere above him, 3 floors up, he could faintly hear Elspeth having a spirited disagreement with the dark about whether the lamp should be left on. And then Isadora's voice. Low. Patient. Negotiating. Always negotiating. "You are in my house," he'd told her. "Under my name." He pressed his fingers briefly over his closed eyes. He thought about the journal in the drawer. He thought about Rosalind. He thought about a purse of coins pressed into shaking hands on a dock in Barbados, 11 years ago, and a girl who hadn't looked back. "Where do I know you from?" He opened the drawer. He took out the journal. He looked at the cover for a long moment. And this time, he didn't put it back. He read it all the way through this time. No stopping. No closing it halfway. No locking it back in the drawer and going to bed and pretending the morning would feel different. He sat in his father's chair and read every word his father had written, and let it land the way it needed to land. By the second hour, the candle had burned low. By the third, the fire had gone to embers. Thomas sat in the cooling room with the journal open on the desk and his hands flat on either side of it, and he stared at one particular passage, one name, and he felt the thing he had been carefully not feeling for 2 months move through him like a tide coming in. Lady Isadora Fennick. His father had written it clearly. Her name, her family, her father's title, her sister Celine, killed. The baby brought to Wycliffe Hall in the dark. Rosalind. And then the other part. The part his father had written with the guilt of a man who knew he was confessing to something he couldn't undo. The correspondence. The letters from Baron Fennick. The documents proving Lady Isadora's identity and inheritance. I have kept them safely these 11 years, intending to find her. I pray whoever reads this will do what I could not. Thomas closed his eyes. He'd burned those papers 3 weeks before Isadora walked through his front door. He pressed his fingers to his forehead. She came here for those documents. She came here and they were already gone. Because I burned them. He sat with that. And then, the other thing. The thing sitting beneath all of it like a flaw dropping out. He stood up. He went to the window. Outside, the garden was dark and still, the rose wall just visible against the moonlit sky. A dock in Barbados, he thought. 1808. A girl with fury in her eyes and shaking hands. He'd pressed coins into those hands and told her to go. He'd ridden away before she could speak. He turned from the window. He looked at the ceiling of his study, the ceiling that was also the floor of the corridor above, the corridor where she'd stood 3 nights ago in a grey wrapper with a candle and one loose auburn curl and said good night, Your Grace, in a voice that was trying to be final and wasn't. It's her. The word on the tip of his tongue that he'd been chasing for 7 weeks finally surfaced. It has always been her. He didn't sleep. The house woke around him the way houses do, slowly, in stages. The kitchen first, then the footsteps of the early housemaids, then the sound of the children beginning to stir on the floor above. Thomas was still in his study when the first grey light came through the window. He hadn't moved for an hour. He was thinking about one thing. If she finds out about Rosalind, she'll take her. He pressed his fist against his mouth. She has every right to. Rosalind is her blood. Her niece. The last living piece of a sister who was killed. She came all this way not even knowing the child was here, and the moment she finds out. He stood up abruptly. He walked to the window. He walked back. He thought about Rosalind at 8 years old pressing her cold feet against his legs in the dark weeks after Helena died. He thought about her on top of the wardrobe, arms folded, assessing the door. He thought about her face when she first looked at Isadora, that flicker of something she couldn't name. I think you were meant to come here. His chest felt like something was being slowly tightened inside it. He picked up the journal. He put it back in the drawer. He locked it. Then he stood up, straightened his coat, and went to find her. She was in the garden. Of course she was. It was early, barely past 7, and the morning was grey and restless, the sky the particular colour it goes before English rain decides to commit. The roses along the wall had dropped some petals overnight. The gravel was still damp. Isadora stood beneath the overhang of the servants' entrance at the side of the house, her shawl pulled around her shoulders, her face turned toward the garden. She looked like a woman making a decision. Thomas crossed the gravel toward her. He hadn't rehearsed this. He'd decided, somewhere between the study and the garden, that there was no version of this conversation that benefited from rehearsal. She heard him coming. She turned. She took one look at his face and went very still. He stopped in front of her. I read the journal, he said. Last night. All of it. He held her gaze. I need you to know that I've known for 2 months. And I said nothing. The garden was very quiet. Known what, Your Grace, she said carefully. Your name. A beat. Your family. Another beat. Rosalind. The stillness that followed was a different kind entirely. He watched her face, the way the composure held, and held, and held, and then shifted at the edges in a way that 11 years of discipline couldn't entirely prevent. You said nothing, she said. No. Because of Rosalind. Because she is 8 years old, he said, and she has already lost one mother. And the thought of losing her, he stopped. His jaw tightened. I am not proud of it. But I am telling you now because I cannot, he exhaled. I cannot have you look at me and not know exactly who I am. She was very still. The first drops of rain had started. Quiet, English, persistent. The documents, she said. My father's correspondence. He met her eyes. I burned them. Flat. Honest. He gave it to her without cushioning it because she deserved the plain truth. 3 weeks before you arrived. I didn't know what they were. I cleared the old correspondence and, he stopped. They're gone. The journal is all that remains. And the journal alone is not legally sufficient, she said quietly. No. The rain was coming down properly now. He'd walked out without a coat and hadn't noticed until this moment. It didn't seem to matter. I'm sorry, he said. For all of it. Every piece of it. She looked at him for a long moment. The rain fell between them. Then something in her face changed. Not broke. Changed. Opened. Like a room where someone has finally crossed the room and pushed back the curtains after keeping them drawn for years. Thomas, she said. Not your grace. Not sir. Thomas. Fully. Quietly. Like she'd always known his name. He went very still. I know you burned them, she said. Her voice was different now. I know you kept the journal. I know you have spent 2 months being frightened for her and frightened for me and trying to be honorable about both at once, and that it has cost you considerably. She looked at him directly. I know you, Thomas Blackwell. I have known you since you were 21 years old and too decent to walk past a stranger. The silence that followed was enormous. Since I was, he started. Barbados, she said. The word landed in the rain between them like a stone dropped into still water. Thomas looked at her. He looked at her the way a man looks when 11 years of a feeling he couldn't name suddenly assembles itself into perfect, devastating sense. That was you, he said. That was me. You were, he took one step toward her. You were 18. And you never asked my name. Something moved through his expression, recognition, and grief, and something else entirely, something that had been building in the space between them for 7 weeks and had apparently decided it was finished waiting. I thought about you, he said. The words came out rough. Unmanaged. I didn't understand why. I hoped you were safe. I hoped that wherever you went after. I was, she said. Eventually. I was safe. He was standing directly in front of her now, under the narrow overhang that wasn't really wide enough for 2 people and was currently containing 2 people and 11 years of everything neither of them had said. He was soaked through. He didn't appear to have noticed. I ended my engagement, he said. Last night. I wrote the letter before I came to find you. Thomas. Not for you, he said quickly. Then, that's not, he stopped. Pressed his eyes shut for 1 second. Opened them. I ended it because she was never going to be. He stopped again. He couldn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. She could see it on his face, everything he'd been carrying since the moment she walked into this house. Everything he'd managed and measured and kept behind the professional distance and the adjusted cufflink and the careful Miss Whitmore every time his voice wanted to say something else. I'm in love with you, he said. Quiet. Certain. Like something finally set down after a very long time of carrying it. I have been in love with you for what feels like considerably longer than 7 weeks. I don't know when it started. I know I can't, he shook his head. I will not stand here in the rain and not say it. She looked at him. And then she kissed him. Not planned. Not decided. The kind of thing that happens when a person has been patient for 11 years and runs, completely and finally, out of patience. His hands came up to her face, both of them, warm against her cold cheeks, and for one long, still, rain-soaked moment the whole world contracted down to exactly this. When she stepped back, he looked like a man whose understanding of gravity had been quietly, permanently revised. I came here for the documents, she said. Her voice was not entirely steady. I did not come here for you. I know. And then I stayed for the children. I know. And then, she stopped. Her green eyes on his. You were never supposed to be part of this. He looked at her for one long moment. And then Thomas Blackwell, Duke of Wycliffe, 32 years old, classically handsome in the way of old portraits, went down on one knee in the wet gravel outside the servants' entrance of his own house. In the rain. Without a coat. Isadora pressed her hand over her mouth. Lady Isadora Fennick, he said, looking up at her with the most open, undefended expression she had ever seen on his face. I freed you on a dock in Barbados and rode away without asking your name. I burned your documents. I employed you as my nanny. I fell in love with you in my own library and spent 2 weeks pretending I hadn't. He paused. I have absolutely nothing to offer you that you have not already taken back for yourself. Except 3 children who need you. And a house that has been waiting to feel like this again. A breath. And the rest of my life. She laughed. Real. Full. The kind of laugh that had nothing composed about it. Warm and genuine and completely, helplessly alive. Get up, she said. You are ruining your trousers. Is that a yes? Thomas. Get up. Is it a yes? She reached down and took his hand. He rose. He was right in front of her, soaked through, smiling with his whole face, nothing managed or measured or held back. She looked at this man. This impossible, honorable, thoroughly rain-drenched man. It is a yes, she said. He pulled her in. His arms around her. Her head against his chest. The rain coming down on both of them in the grey English morning outside the servants' entrance of Wycliffe Hall. Neither of them moved. Above them, in the warm house, 3 children were beginning to wake. And then, a small face appeared at the nursery window on the 2nd floor. Rosalind. She looked down at the 2 of them in the garden for a long moment. Then she turned away from the window. Henry, she said, with the serenity of someone whose plan had proceeded exactly on schedule. Go back to sleep. Everything is fine. She pulled the curtain closed. The morning after the rain was a different kind of morning. Nothing looked different. The house was the same house. The breakfast table was set the same way. The children came downstairs in the same order. Rosalind first, Henry second, Elspeth last and loudest. But something in the quality of the air had changed. Mrs. Hartley, the housekeeper, 50 years in service and having seen everything worth seeing, said nothing when she noticed it. She simply went to the kitchen and instructed cook to make a slightly better breakfast than usual. This was her version of a standing ovation. Victoria's response to the letter arrived by midday. Thomas read it at his desk. It was 2 pages long and said very little except that she was displeased, that she considered his conduct ungentlemanly, and that she intended to make her feelings known in the appropriate circles. He folded it. He set it aside. He wrote 1 reply. 4 sentences. He sealed it and handed it to the footman without reading it again. That afternoon, a society acquaintance called unannounced, the second such caller that week, with a concerned expression and a thinly veiled reference to certain rumors circulating about the Wycliffe household. The nature of the nanny. The circumstances of the ended engagement. The questions being asked in certain drawing rooms. Thomas received this acquaintance in the front sitting room. He listened to everything said. Then he said, "Thank you for your concern. You may tell whoever sent you that I intend to address this publicly. Very soon." The acquaintance left looking uncertain. Thomas went back to his study. Publicly, he'd said. He meant it. Lord Aldwell's dinner was 3 days later. It was exactly the kind of gathering Thomas would normally have declined. 30 people, all the right families, the particular social machinery of the ton operating at full pressure. But he accepted. Deliberately. He arrived. He was received. He moved through the room with the ease of a man who had grown up in it and no longer needed anything from it. Lady Aldwell found him near the fireplace between the soup course and the fish. She was 70 years old, sharp as cut glass, and the finest distribution system in London. If something needed to be known by everyone within 48 hours, you told Lady Aldwell. Thomas had always understood this. He greeted her warmly. He inquired after her health. And then, with the calm precision of a man who had decided what he was doing and was doing it completely, he told her the truth. All of it. The engagement ended. The reason. Isadora's real name. Her family. The Caribbean title. His intention to pursue her claim through every legal avenue available. Lady Aldwell stood very still during this recitation. When he finished, she looked at him for a long moment. "You do understand," she said, "what you are proposing?" Completely, Thomas said. A duke. Marrying his children's nanny. A duke, Thomas said, marrying Lady Isadora Fennick, daughter of Baron Edouard Fennick of Trinidad, whose claim I intend to establish formally. He met her eyes. The nanny part was temporary. The rest is permanent. Lady Aldwell looked at him for another moment. Then the corner of her mouth moved. Well, she said, that is considerably more interesting than anything else happening this season. She patted his arm. She turned. She walked directly toward the Countess of Pemberton. Thomas picked up his wine. By Thursday, Victoria had threatened every society column in London. He'd beaten her to it. Thomas Blackwell just told the truth in front of 30 of the most powerful people in London. Victoria has nothing left to use. But there is still one conversation that matters more than any of this, and it's waiting upstairs in the nursery at Wycliffe Hall. If this story has meant something to you, hit that like button right now, subscribe, and share it. The ending of this story is something you are going to want to watch twice. They told Rosalind on a Saturday morning. Thomas and Isadora agreed on this without much discussion. It was simply understood between them that it had to be both of them, together, and that it had to be soon. The schoolroom. All 3 children present. Henry because he asked quietly the night before and neither adult could find a reason to refuse. Elspeth because she could not be excluded from anything and had very strong feelings about fairness. Elspeth sat with a biscuit and an expression of great importance. Henry sat with his hands in his lap and said nothing. Rosalind sat across the table from both of them with her back straight and her hands folded and her chin at the particular angle she used when she was preparing herself for something. She'd always been able to tell when something important was coming. Thomas started. He kept his voice steady. He told Rosalind that she had come to Wycliffe Hall as a baby, that her mother had been a woman who loved her, that she had been brought here and kept safe because the people who loved her had wanted her to live. He told her that she had been loved every single day of 8 years, as completely as any child had ever been loved. You are mine, he said. Nothing changes that. Nothing ever will. Rosalind looked at him. Then she looked at Isadora. She's the family, she said. Isn't she? The one you mentioned. Thomas looked at Isadora. Isadora leaned forward. My sister was your mother, Rosalind. Her name was Celine. She was, her voice held. She made it hold. She was extraordinary. And she loved you before she ever met you. The schoolroom was very quiet. Rosalind looked at the table. Just for a moment. One breath. Then she looked back up. So you are my family, she said. Yes, Isadora said. And Papa is my family. Always, Thomas said. His voice did something on that word. He made it hold anyway. And Henry and Elspeth. Yes, my darling. All of us. Rosalind nodded once. She was quiet for a moment in the particular way she was quiet when she was putting something very large into its proper place inside herself. Carefully, precisely, because Rosalind Blackwell did not do anything carelessly. Mama always said family was the people who stayed, she said. She looked at Isadora. You stayed. Isadora's composure, 11 years of it, armored and disciplined and tested, cracked. Just at the edges. Just enough. Yes, she said. I stayed. Rosalind unfolded her hands. She placed one of them on top of Isadora's on the table. A small hand. Warm. Certain. Thomas looked at the ceiling. He was not going to cry in front of his children. He looked at the ceiling for quite a long time. Elspeth, who had been waiting with impressive patience, raised her biscuit. Are we celebrating? She asked. Yes, Henry said softly. He was looking at his father's face. Something in his own face was very careful and very warm. I think we are. Then I need another biscuit, Elspeth said. 2, Thomas said. His voice was not entirely steady. 3, Elspeth said. 2, Isadora said. 2.5, Rosalind said, without looking up from the table. That is a reasonable compromise and everyone should accept it. The room broke. All 5 of them. Thomas laughing with his whole chest for the second time in as many weeks, Henry grinning the grin that changed his whole face, Elspeth already reaching for the biscuit plate, Rosalind maintaining perfect dignity while the corners of her mouth committed total mutiny. And Isadora? Isadora laughed the real laugh. The one with nothing composed about it. The one that was warm and full and entirely, completely alive. Thomas looked at her across the table. She looked back. There it is, he thought. There is the whole reason. The legal matter took 8 months. Thomas hired the finest solicitors in London. He wrote to the Caribbean courts himself. He called in every connection his father had established across Trinidad and Barbados over 30 years of trade. He pursued it with the quiet, systematic relentlessness of a man who has decided something and does not require external momentum to continue. Isadora watched him do it. She watched him sit at his desk by lamplight long after the house went quiet, writing letters in that careful hand. She watched him receive replies and redirect and adjust and try again. She watched him refuse to stop. "You don't have to do this," she told him once. "I came for the documents. The documents are gone. I can." "I know you can," he said. He looked up from the letter. "I'm not doing it because you can't. I'm doing it because it's yours. And because my father should have done it 20 years ago." She looked at him. "Thomas." "It's yours," he said simply. "That's the end of it." She stood in the doorway of his study for a moment. Then she walked in. She set a cup of tea beside his letter. She put her hand briefly on his shoulder. He covered it with his own. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. The recognition came in late autumn. Partial, not everything, not perfect, the law being what the law was and the Caribbean courts being what they were, but sufficient. Enough to establish her name formally. Enough to settle the estate question. Enough to make Lady Isadora Fennick a legal truth and not just a fact kept in a dead man's journal. Thomas read the solicitor's letter at his desk. He sat with it for a moment. Then he went to find her. She was in the garden with Rosalind, the two of them crouched beside the rose wall looking at something in the soil, Rosalind pointing and explaining with great authority, Isadora listening with her full attention the way she gave everything her full attention. He stood at the garden door and watched them for a moment. 2 pairs of the same green eyes. Celine, he thought. She's right here. She's been here all along. He walked toward them. Isadora looked up. She saw his face. She knew before he said a word. She stood up slowly. He held out the letter. She took it. She read it. Her hands were perfectly still. She looked up. "It's enough," he said quietly. Her throat moved. "It's enough," she agreed. Rosalind looked between them. "What's enough?" "Your Aunt Isadora," Thomas said, "has just been given back something that belonged to her." Rosalind considered this. "Good," she said. "It should have been hers all along." She went back to examining the rose bed. Thomas looked at Isadora. She was still holding the letter. Her eyes were bright, not tears, not quite, just the particular brightness of something very large being felt at a very low volume. "It's not everything," he said. "No," she agreed. "But it's mine." He smiled. "Yes," he said. "You are." The wedding was small. Helena's favorite part of the Wycliffe garden, a late autumn morning, the sky clean and cold and pale blue, the last roses still on the wall. 8 guests. The vicar from the village church. Mrs. Hartley in her best dress standing very straight and permitting herself one small smile. The children in the front row. Elspeth in white, a crown of late flowers already slightly sideways, her whole body vibrating with the effort of sitting still. Henry in his first proper coat, his sketchpad tucked inside it against direct instruction. He drew later from memory, he always did. Rosalind. Sitting with her hands folded. Back straight. The expression of someone whose long game had finally, completely, gloriously paid off. Thomas stood at the end of the garden path. He straightened his cuffs once. He looked at the gate. He did not look away. Isadora came through the gate in ivory, warm and soft, not the white of a debutante but the ivory of a woman who had been many things and arrived, finally, at the truest one. Her auburn hair up, a few small late roses threaded through it. No bonnet. No borrowed name. Just herself. Her green eyes found his across the garden the moment she came through the gate. He smiled before he could stop it. Not the controlled, managed smile of Thomas Blackwell, Duke of Wycliffe. The real one. The one that had been missing for 2 years and had been coming back, piece by piece, since a grey Tuesday morning 7 months ago when the fourth candidate walked through his front door and looked at an overturned fern and nearly smiled. The full one. Open and unmanaged and entirely, completely his. She saw it. She felt it land in her chest like something coming home. She walked toward him. After the ceremony, Rosalind stepped forward and took both their hands. One each. Thomas's right, Isadora's left. She stood between them with the quiet authority of a child who had been orchestrating this from the beginning and intended to see it properly finished. Now you're both stuck, she said. Rosalind, Thomas said. I mean it in a good way, she said. Elspeth launched herself at Isadora's skirts at considerable speed. Mama, she announced. Can I have a biscuit now? 2, Thomas said. 3, Elspeth said. 2, Isadora said. 2.5, Rosalind said. Final offer. Take it. They took it. Henry stood slightly apart, watching all of them with that quiet, careful attention of his. When Isadora looked over at him, he reached inside his coat and pulled out the sketch pad. He turned it around. It was the garden. All 5 of them. Isadora in her ivory dress. Thomas with his whole face showing. Rosalind straight-backed and certain. Elspeth mid-motion, already reaching for something. And Henry himself, drawn in his own corner, watching it all. He'd given them all crowns. Not curtain fringe ones. Real ones. Isadora looked at it for a long moment. The likeness, she said, is extraordinary. Henry grinned with his whole face. That night, long after the children were asleep, Thomas and Isadora stood at the library window together. The garden was dark and still below. The candles burned low behind them. She leaned her head against his shoulder. He rested his chin on her hair. Neither of them spoke for a while. You know, she said quietly, I came here for documents. I know. I had a plan. A very sensible one, he said. I was going to find the proof, reclaim my title, and leave. Clearly. You were not part of the plan. He turned his head slightly. She felt the movement. And yet, he said. She looked up at him. And yet, she agreed. He kissed her forehead. She closed her eyes. Outside, Wycliffe Hall stood quiet in the autumn dark, pale stone, ivy thick on the walls, warm light in every window. It had been a beautiful house for a long time. For 2 years it had been a quiet one. Not anymore. From upstairs, faintly, unmistakably, the distant sound of Elspeth loudly informing the dark that she required a 4th biscuit and was prepared to negotiate. And then Rosalind's voice, calm as ever, already managing it. Thomas closed his eyes. Isadora laughed. That real laugh. The extraordinary one. And Wycliffe Hall, which had been quietly lonely for 2 years, 3 months, and 11 days, was never quietly lonely again. And that is the story of the man who gave a stranger her freedom on a dock in Barbados, rode away without asking her name, and spent 11 years with a feeling he couldn't place. Until she knocked on his door. Until she sat outside a library and read botany to a lonely little boy. Until she looked at a child with her dead sister's eyes and stayed, not for the documents, not for the title, but because some things are simply meant. He gave her freedom with one hand. And her heart with the other. Neither of them knew it yet. If this story did something to your chest, if you found yourself holding your breath in a rain-soaked garden outside a servant's entrance, or counting biscuits with 3 children who deserved the whole world, then you already know what to do. Hit that like button. It costs you nothing and it means everything. Subscribe, because there are more stories exactly like this one waiting for you. Love that earns itself. Secrets that unravel slowly. And people who find each other in the most impossible, most perfectly inevitable ways. And share this with someone who needs a love story today. Someone who believes in the kind of love that doesn't announce itself, it just stays. We will see you in the next one. And trust me when I say, you don't want to miss it.